Hey, can we get everybody's attention, please? We're going to get started here. I want to thank everybody for coming, and thank you for everybody that will be watching now and later at home. Thank you guys all for coming. It's great to have you. We can't do this without you. I'm not sure if you guys are all aware, but this month marks our 3-year anniversary of doing Theology on Tap. So far, we've had over 210, close to 220 members join us. And I think tonight we have another 5 or 6 new people here. So thank you to all the familiar faces. Thank you to all the new people for coming. Tonight, as a treat for our 3-year anniversary, we have from the Ruthenian Greek Catholic Archieparchy of Pittsburgh, Metropolitan Archbishop William Skurla, who was appointed by Pope Benedict XVI. And I believe he's already spent a few months in Rome with Pope Leo. So without further ado, let's welcome him up.
Thank you. And always good to be here in Johnstown. I'm going to just take it out. Let's get closer to it. Yeah, and just right from Pittsburgh, we have our chancery is in just on the north side of Pittsburgh by Riverview Park, and where the observatory is up on the hill that you see from the football stadium. Been there, starting my 15th year in Pittsburgh. And it's the longest I've ever lived anywhere. I've been all over the country. I started off in Duluth, Minnesota, and ended up in eastern PA for a number of years, about 10 years out there, and then about 15 years out in Arizona, and 5 years in New Jersey, and now 14 and so far in Pittsburgh. And it's... Okay. Bane of my existence here. Yeah. Good. There we go. So I've been around a few different places, and I started off as a Franciscan. I guess you have the TOR here, and it was in Seibertsville, Pennsylvania. So some people wanted to know about that. It was like a community that was set up in the Order of Friars Minor to work with the Byzantine Catholic Church where I'm from, and it's been all over the United States, and there's, I think, in Ukraine also they have a little bit of the Franciscans there. They started a community just about the time that the Soviet Union kind of broke up. They were able to start a community in Ukraine, so they're in that area. And it's, of course, the Franciscans, you have St. Francis of Assisi, who is kind of being honored this year by the church for one of his anniversaries. And if you have time to look at the life of St. Francis, he's kind of a patron of Pope Francis during his time, which was a horror to the Jesuits because he called himself Francis. And I think Francis would have been horrified too, because he always hated being in control or in positions of leadership. He's just always to try and live very simply and to live in a poor way, and to kind of service anything that the church needs, and you kind of go anywhere, any place, and to be there. So it's and the difference is that it's within the Byzantine Catholic Church, where, we're getting the music now. I always wondered about what Theology on Tap would be like. We should have had a beer before I started this. Yeah. But it's the only difference would be is it kind of brings in both the Eastern Catholic Church dimension, and also the idea of St. Francis serving the poor and working in anything in any place in the world, this kind of thing. But for the TORs, we've had a few vocations that they had by ritual faculties and work here in this area, all at our different parishes. There we go. It's always good to be able to be heard. Yeah, I'm just kind of getting over COVID, so I don't have my booming voice that I normally have. So I'm just kind of just hopeful that we can get through that. Okay, and then just the differences from the East and the West. You're pretty familiar with the Byzantine Church here in Johnstown. You have like our sister church, which broke away from us, is the Carpatho-Russian Church in Johnstown, and we also have St. Mary's here, and then over in East Conemaugh, up on, we have like another 10 parishes in the area here. And the big difference is, we all believe in the same sacraments and believe in Jesus Christ, and it's, we have intercommunion between, the different churches, and you can get faculties as a priest to serve in both. And I did for many years, worked in the Roman Catholic Church and had different service in that area. And it's just kind of a different kind of approach to spirituality that's like slightly different than the Roman Church. Because it has more of its origins in kind of the Greek traditions from Constantinople or Rome, kind of focused around Rome. And over the years, they've kind of drifted apart a little bit and kind of had sort of a unique experience. If you've never been to a Byzantine liturgy, you can go down the street and there's at least one or two churches there. I think both Ruthenian and Ukrainian Catholic, and then a number of Orthodox churches in the immediate area here too. And it's, we try to work together. We work in Pittsburgh. We have the ecumenical group, and I think you also have it here in Johnstown. Bishop Archbishop and Bishop Gregory for the Orthodox. We're all in the same kind of southwestern Pennsylvania group, but it kind of focuses in here on being in Johnstown. We're more over towards Pittsburgh. And try to get out this way as often as I can. We're here about I know Route 22 so well. Where every McDonald's is along the way, and where every bump is on the road too. It's always good. Yeah, just I guess there was a question about Pope Leo, and I did spend because I'm like the representative from our church. I'm the head of the Byzantine Catholic Church in the United States and Canada. So I'm like a permanent member of the synods when they go on, coming back over like 4 or 5 times. I think I've been to more synods from somebody from the United States than anybody else. And he was always just kind of a nice guy. I actually thought he was Italian because he would always give his presentations in Italian. And even when he was in, he said he was from the United States, but I thought he was just kind of in a, kind of just a temporary position because he ended up out in South America. So he's what you see is what you get. He's just a very, kind of normal person from Chicago who has been lifted up and raised in. Well, I think kind of dedicated to following the different traditions that Pope Francis had started. And he's just a little bit more, kind of plans things ahead a little bit more than Francis. Francis is kind of like the Donald Trump of the Catholic Church. Something came to his mind, he'd say it, and he'd just go, you don't really want to say it that way. but again, he had the spirit that's kind of the same thing with St. Francis. In his life, he would always just kind of, what came to his mind, he would just say. And he was always very much, somebody that worked and was kind of contacted in a very real way in his time of being kind of a hermit and praying in the different churches in Italy, and kind of, just really getting close to God. And that's the energy that Francis had, I think, and Leo also shares that, as he was, studied here in Pennsylvania, and down in Philadelphia. So he, I think, will be a real good pope over the period of time. And the number 4 question is, well, what is a metropolitan archbishop? Yeah, I still trying to figure that out for all the years. The metropolitan part means that it's like the Roman Catholic bishops or the other, there's another Ukrainian metropolitan archbishop in Philadelphia, is kind of the same term, but for my particular one, it means that I'm the head of a particular church, which means I have all kinds of different responsibilities that like a normal archbishop would not have, where you have you serve on it's now the Eastern Dicastery, which used to be the Eastern Congregation. You're a member of that, and you have to go to Rome quite a bit just to kind of build up different kind of things that happen in the church. And usually it means they want you to fix something. It's usually the difficult part of being a metropolitan archbishop is you're somewhat responsible for all the bishops that are under you. We have another 3 bishops in the United States, and we're still looking for a 4th one because we have another eparchy or diocese up in Canada. So if you want to apply, we'll get you application or education. Or I wouldn't wish it on my worst friend. It's a call to service that you would be able to do that. And just a regular work week it just varies from day to day. So what happens? And I think one bishop out in Arizona was Bishop Olmsted, and he was at a meeting and he said, he'd always go into the office every day and have a plan. He was going to call so many people and get his talks ready for the next couple of things. And then the phone would ring, and then he'd find out what he was doing for that day. And he said, everything is just always an interruption. You're always responding to what the people need and what the priests need. And each time that you do that, it was kind of his conclusion that the interruptions were his job. And that's always what we do as a leader within the church. It has, you get to wear fancy clothes and get a good place to sit and the dinner and all the things like that. But ultimately, you're the servant of the servants, and you have to go and be with people, and to also be with your priests and your religious that you have. Always, you have something that they need to have done, and you try to respond to all those different things. And then, this was the last question that he had. We have some open questions after that. Is just a message from the Annunciation, and which we're celebrating today, and that's why some people are not here because they're having church right now over at St. Mary's. It's at the same time period. It's a feast day of Mary's, answer to the Lord's call to her, and her ultimate answer is yes, to follow after, what she was being called to be the mother of the Son of God, which she didn't really comprehend, but was always open to that, and always a person that was someone that's probably the closest to God that we'll ever meet, and is always a part of our prayer life and a part of our tradition as Catholics. And you always can pray to her, and she'll intercede and help you with anything that you need. Alrighty, well, those are the 5 questions that they have. I don't know if there's any questions. This is the terror part of being at a meeting where people are drinking, so it's always. But anything you want to ask, you can ask, I guess. It would be good. Okay, over here. Okay.
So how did the Ruthenian Greek Catholic eparchy start in America? Because it's my understanding that when the Rusian people originally came over here, that eparchy didn't exist. And most of that is out of the eparchy of Mukachevo. Can you provide any insight into that, like how that's got its footing in America?
Right. Yeah, kind of the mother eparchy for us is in Mukachevo, a very beautiful little city in western Ukraine, which doesn't get too many bugs, but you go there, you have your cell phone, and you hold it out, you get like weather reports, you get a thunderstorm warning, you get like a missile warning there. And just like with a thunderstorm or a tornado warning, well, somebody's going to get blown up, but it's over there. But it's all part of that thing. But Mukachevo, it was a massive migration from there. Just in some cases, like in New Jersey, the entire town, or village, from up in the mountains, just migrated into Passaic, New Jersey, and they took over the whole area. And that's true for, in this part of the country too. Johnstown was a huge Slavic population, and it was, there was open immigration there, and they needed jobs. And originally from Minnesota, they did the same thing where the immigration came in, and what they would do is they had recruiters go from here, or from Minnesota, they'd have like 50,000 leaflets, and they'd say, present this and we'll give you a job. And so they would walk, to, the nearest port because there wasn't much transportation there. And then, get on an ocean liner and come, and it was where our beginnings came. Initially, they didn't have priests to come, and they were just here. There was large groups of people in Minnesota, like in Minneapolis, thousands of, well, I guess they would call them Rusins today, or, you know, it was before Slovakia or you know, Ukraine existed, so they would just consider themselves our people. That's how they would respond. And you would know you were a particular, if you were a Rusin, if you kind of had to try to explain who you were. Because on your passport it said Austrian, and then, well, they said, well, you don't speak German. Well, you know, so you must be Hungarian. And then the Hungarians started to come. They said, you don't speak Hungarian. Who are you? And it was kind of that milieu that we came into, where there were lots of people in this area, again, in Johnstown, in this mountain area. There was all the mining things where they had been brought to the United States, and a lot of times didn't speak any English at all. And all they had was like the name Johnstown on their thing, and they'd get on a train and they'd end up here at the train station, and they'd get jobs and be here. But in the meantime, they just didn't have priests here, you know, for a long period of time. And it was a time you don't really appreciate how important a priest is until you don't have them. And there were no religious, so they actually organized and built the churches, and then petitioned with the Austro-Hungarian government and the church there, writing to Mukachevo. And eventually they did send priests, and they do a circuit ride from Freeland, Pennsylvania to Minneapolis on a train, you know, so they just like one priest for the whole country. But eventually they did organize the parishes, and they were able to get priests here. And then eventually they finally had so Doratinsky was the first bishop sent over to start to organize the church and build it into what it is today. Our church actually was with the Ukrainian Catholic Church, and the Ruthenian, the original name is Ruthenian, and they split off from us in 1924, and then the rest is just kind of multiplication of Philadelphia and Pittsburgh, and then all the other eparchies in the United States and Canada. But does that kind of answer that? Or,
yeah, absolutely. Thank you.
Yeah. So it was a long time where they didn't have priests, and when you have priests and you don't have a bishop, you fall under the Romans, and some were favorable and some were not. And there was some tragedies with that. But we were the first of the Eastern Catholic churches in the United States, so I always kind of think of us as the Marines, you know, and kind of going into Guadalcanal. And we took, you know, a lot of hits, but, you know, today that has changed, you know, with the new, there's like 23 Eastern churches. That was last week. I was in St. Louis. We had our meeting and had 15 different bishops there from all the different organizations, and they have it so easy. It just makes you cry, because they're coming into the United States with the traditions and all the issues that we had were kind of resolved at this point. That through the cooperation, they're all in charge of committees at the United States Catholic Council of Bishops, and it's a different world than it was back in around the turn of the century when our people came. Okay, over. Yes.
What's stopping the Orthodox and Catholic from ending the schism and coming back together? You keep saying they split off. Well, why?
Right. Yeah. Well, the primary reason was it actually started in my home state of Minnesota, where he wasn't even married at the time. He was a widower, and he had been married, and he had a real controversy with the Roman Catholic Bishop Ireland, and it was a question of being able to be, what we were in Eastern Europe, and having a married clergy was always part of our thing. So that was the primary reason, and that's why Johnstown and it was the Russian Catholic Church was before that. That was the initial split, but it was mostly over celibacy was the major issue, and then it was the reason that they had divided up between the Ukrainian Catholic and the Ruthenian roots. And some of the other different churches have Romanian. They're just a different nationality, so that they're actually still within the communion of Rome and with the other churches. But that was the primary reason for doing it, and it was a time when the bishops weren't even here. That initially they started to break up into different churches. The splits has spread all over the United States and Canada, and that was the primary reason was that now that we have a married clergy, they're not so easy to come back together again because once you start something, it's always difficult to kind of do it. But I think there's hope for the future that we'll have some kind of reunion between the Orthodox Church and the Catholic Church.
Are people trying? Like, is there people that are like trying to bridge the gap and say like, "Hey, come back"?
No, we do it just about every day. And it's hard because a lot of people would like to see that, and it's like for us, we have both the Ruthenian, Ukrainian, Byzantine Catholic churches, and they're different. They're just over the years they've just kind of there's a different immigration quotient that they have, and a lot of times it's just differences in kind of once it starts, it's hard to kind of pull it back together. The one thing that we do is we do have like an ecumenical group, and we do celebrate things together as best we can. But I think for the future, I think there's more hope, for that kind of an Orthodox reunion. I think Pope Leo has also been interested that he went to Constantinople as his first international visit. So there's interest on the Roman Catholic side, and I think on the Orthodox side, they just want to keep what they have because they're not growing as a church.
Yeah.
So that's the thing. Okay. On this side, somebody. Oh, you look brave. Okay, there you go.
So why do Eastern Catholic churches exist, and when did they start?
Well, they go back right to the very beginnings of the church when the apostles went out. They, the first council in Jerusalem, and then they started with Paul to go to Greece, and that was one of the primary places where they went. And some went to Rome, some went to Alexandria, some went to Antioch, and they all had their own particular traditions that they had. So it goes back to the apostles and just kind of spreading out and going from region to region, and as they did, they had bishops, and eventually they had patriarchs for the 5 major churches, and they all each had their own traditions, and we follow from that because the missionaries came to Eastern Europe, and they kind of evangelized, and also at the same time as Cyril and Methodius was also Roman Catholic missionaries, so some countries have both Byzantine and Roman churches there.
But what I'm really curious about is so why is it that Eastern Catholic churches are neither Orthodox nor Roman Catholic?
Ooh. That's a good question, and it's one that you always have to deal with, and it's not so much that we draw from both traditions, just like to be a Byzantine and a Franciscan, you draw different elements of spirituality and liturgical things from each of the groups. But we have our own existence. It's like for the Roman Catholic Church, you draw things from the Protestant churches and from the Orthodox. I think some of the Roman Catholic churches now have more icons than we do. It's just because you pull that in from the other groups that you belong to. But the reason that they exist is they're just there. In some villages they would have had just one church in a particular village, but most of the time there's always been a choice between the different ones. But the reason for being is that's one Roman Catholic priest asked me that a long time ago. I said, I don't know, it's born that way. It's just kind of a tradition that you have, and it's today people don't necessarily stay with the church that they're baptized, but they choose to go to wherever they feel they can experience God. And they try to preserve their traditions, and we do that too. Yep.
So do Eastern Catholic churches claim apostolic succession?
Yes. Yeah. I can trace it back. You can go online if you want to check me out. The Catholic hierarchy goes back for all the bishops in the Catholic communion, and it traces them all back to Peter, and that's where we come from. Okay, on that side, or no? Okay. Way in the back. Okay, there you are.
One is tempted to assume that in the old country, it would be somewhat easy to be a married priest to sort of, in the Middle Ages, to sort of have a little village and a little church in a little village and have a family and eke out a living on a little plot of land. But in the post-industrial United States, do you think it's more difficult for married Catholic priests to support their families and make a living?
Right. Yeah, that was like the view of one priest's wife. She was in the Romanian Catholic Church. She said, it's not easy. Because at that time we had celibate priests, and she said, if you want to know what it's like, it's not easy. And she said, I'll straighten them out. They'll remain celibate and become priests. They do within the Roman Church. It's difficult, and I think for anybody that's married or has been married, it's not easy. And like from trying to work with the different churches that we have, I think over half of our clergy today are married, and it's kind of a quick transition that it's, in the old days, 98% of people got married, and there were only 2% to kind of consider vocations to the priesthood or religious life. But no matter how you cut it, it's difficult. We manage, because we have the parishes. We have like a married priest here in Johnstown. Ferris is over in our parish, just a few miles from here. And it is difficult to do, but what they do is they manage to kind of support themselves through extra work that they can do, and their wives, some of them are doctors and lawyers, so they tell them what to do. But it is, I have to say, it is a problem, always and much simpler to be like your life and as a celibate, or my life as a celibate. It allows you to be a little bit more free. But it also gives you access to a whole world of experience of raising children, and you have a little bit more ability to talk to families and say, I feel your pain, it's like Bill Clinton or something. But it's doable, and they've been doing it for a couple thousand years, so they seem to be okay with it. Okay, go back here.
Kind of to tack on to Matt's question there, do you also think too that it would be a little more difficult, at least in the United States, because for a long period of time, you weren't allowed to have married Catholic priests in the United States for a very long time until in the past, like 15 years or so with Pope Francis. Do you think that would also play a role in that with the difficulty of understanding like a married priest compared to like someone like I was raised in the Roman Rite, so
Right.
up until a couple of years ago, never really met a married priest until I started going to St. Mary's. So
Right. Yeah, it was about a 75-year period, and I finally ordained the first married clergy for our church in 75 years. And it was a gap, but even during that time, we always had some, priests coming in from Europe, so we always had, it was a continuous tradition of having, priests that were married in the United States. And people knew about it, and they always thought we kind of got the short end of the deal when they cut it off. And I asked my grandmother, because I wanted to get married, and she said, just go Orthodox, which is the case here. There's several of the Orthodox priests were, through our St. Cyril and Methodius in Pittsburgh, and instead of being ordained for us, they were for one of the Orthodox churches in the U.S. So it's not that strange to them, and they always have had that as part of our tradition. That I think from the very time I was like this tall, my grandmother said, "Yeah, we should have married clergy again." At least we'd have somebody here, to be in our parish in northern Minnesota. But it's kind of a refining your way through it, and kind of setting up very complicated things like salary and medical insurance, and what happens when the priest dies, and all those things it is a more complicated system. But I think from talking to the guys, they feel fulfilled and also have little kids to take care of, and not to say that there's not problems with that. It's always difficult to raise children today, and they're all healthy and strong, then it's good, but it is an extra burden to carry, I think, to have children. Oh, I didn't mean to say that. That's bad. No, you're good. Yeah, and way in the back there.
So to some extent, Franciscans are all unique. You meet one Franciscan, you've met one Franciscan, right? But there's also stuff that's common. So what do you see? What do you see different with the Franciscans who are working in the Eastern churches?
Right. Yeah, because, well, it's like if you go back to St. Francis, he was, he kind of eventually, kind of took on and formed a community, but initially he went up into the Carchery and some of the other, Subiaco, he was up there, run by the Benedictines, but in his idea it was like, not, what you see within the Eastern tradition is there's more emphasis on silence and contemplation and kind of pure experience of God. That's where St. Francis started, and when he started to rebuild the church at Porciuncula, he just kind of had a vague idea of what it meant to rebuild the church, and he kind of said, well, maybe he meant something different to me than to, it's a good church, so it's still there. So he did a good job building it and kind of building up different missions. But within the Eastern tradition, it tends to have more of like when we pray, we have very little silence in the liturgy. But when you have your personal prayer life, it's a lot of silence and kind of praying the Jesus prayer, and also, just kind of that whole idea of hesychasm or praying with kind of a more direct contact and an experience of God, which I think is ultimately what makes this group grow or making any church grow, is just an experience of God that comes through prayer and comes through kind of your work that you do as a Franciscan, and of course there are very many types of Franciscans. Each are unique. One question was always, how many different kinds of Franciscans are there? And they said, well, they don't know how many angels you can put on the head of the pin, and only God knows how many Franciscans communities there are. Because it's a spirit that's just really kind of unbounded. And that was the gift of Francis, where other ones were, like Dominic, were more kind of cerebral and everything. And that's why I think Francis chose, Pope Francis chose Francis as his name, because he was somebody that was very much in touch with God, and that's what kind of makes the church grow or die. That was in his time and in our time too. Kind of going through chaos, but places where it is growing, and like here. Yeah. Any questions on the back side there? Oh, no. Okay. Yes. Okay.
I was wondering one thing. You said there was kind of a different spirituality with the Eastern Church. I mean,
Mm-hmm.
are you kind of more like contemplation? Is it kind of more what you focus on, or?
Yeah, that is like, especially like in our monastery, we have times for silent prayer. You have it within the Roman tradition. You have your kind of like, if you do the breviary by yourself, and you have time to reflect on the scripture for the day, and then just allow your mind, to get closer to God. Within especially in like Mount Athos and in those communities, it was much more refined, and it would, almost heretical that they would say that you could somehow experience God in through your prayer life. But if that doesn't happen, the church dies. You can learn everything about the history and everything about all the different groups, but without that encounter, with Jesus Christ, which is like a few sentences back. I think that was my idea. Actually, they actually have a synod on it in Rome of trying to, during Benedict's time, to focus in on what it is that's essential to experiencing God. And so you have the liturgy and just all those things, but there's also the personal prayer life is much more emphasized within the Eastern Church. That you take time to pray, and you have your little prayer corner in the church, have an icon and a candle, and pray. That's kind of a mainstay. Does that kind of get it? Or?
Oh yeah.
Yeah. Okay. And then the way in the back. I didn't mean to say your child was a problem. It's too cute.
Oh, thank you. And thank you for taking the time to come to speak to us tonight, and welcome. I guess my question is because with our family, we appreciate, the different rites within the church, but it seems like, particularly coming from like a Roman Catholic background, that especially for Roman Catholics or Latin Rite Catholics, there's not as much knowledge about the other rites of the church. In fact, if you invite them to an Eastern liturgy, a lot of times that, well, does that fulfill my Sunday obligation? So could you, if you had to give somebody a good definition of what a rite is within the Catholic Church, beyond just maybe the liturgy, how would you define rite to them?
Yeah, well, it's a community that prays together and has a spiritual tradition and history, and also just kind of it does pick up certain parts of the culture. Got to have pierogies, and you have to have belushki, and all those things that come along with it, or Arab traditions and foods, and are all part of your life, and it also works into your spirituality. What was your question exactly, though? It was
like if you had to define a rite to someone, how would you define a rite? What are all the aspects of it? What definition would you give people, or explaining to somebody how it's still part of universal church, like each rite is still in communion with similarities, or what makes a rite?
Right. Yeah, kind of the short answer is they try to stay away from describing it as a rite. Because there's different rites within the Roman Catholic Church. There's the Ambrosian rite, there's Masoretic rite, and some other ones. What's different is that it's actually just a church unto itself. It's not, it is in communion with Rome, and that's one of the things that defines the church within the 23 Eastern and Roman Church together, is that they share communion with one another. And they also have their own way of celebrating the seven sacraments, and each time that they do that, they kind of say, this is what we do, and this is how we believe. And just have a separate, kind of spirituality that comes from the different authors that have published, and kind of the traditions that come up, that they're just a little bit different, from different parts of the world. If you go to India, they have it's a different experience. You talk to, I just spent like a week with them, and I go, are you still our church? You have a book that's in 4 different colors and in 4 different languages. It goes from back to front. Yeah, it's a little different, but with each one of those, they have their own particular church. So they used to use that word rite all the time to describe the Eastern Rite churches, but now they just call them Eastern churches because it's, we're an entity unto ourselves, and that's the way it has been since the time of the apostles. They kind of went out, and St. Thomas went to India, or the different apostles. Paul went to Greece, and Peter went to Rome. So that's kind of the difference between them. Okay, there you go. Okay.
So we have 2 very wonderful sisters with us today. But what would religious life and sisters and religious communities look like in the Eastern churches, or churches like yours?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, pretty much the same. They have, you're more of a service-oriented group. We have those Franciscans out. Ooh.
Like, what are the big ones in the Ruthenian rite, or Ruthenian church?
Right. Have you heard of Uniontown? Yeah, that's our church. I just had a funeral down there this morning, so that's my voice is it's kind of tough. But they were pretty much service-oriented, just like your community from Cameroon. And then there's other ones like they're Carmelite, but I think they're following more of a Benedictine kind of spirituality, and they're more contemplative. Also in Cleveland, and also in, that's, I guess, just outside of Cleveland is their community. And then there's out in, I think in Oregon? No, is it? No, it's in Washington State. They're contemplative groups, where they're kind of small. Yeah, they also have, there's those consecrated virgins, that are kind of hermits, which are kind of religious communities unto themselves, which are, kind of just different, in that sense. So you have the same thing within the Roman Church. You have service and then also contemplative, or with the Franciscans, kind of a blend between the two, where they pray, but they also are embedded into the church as servants. Yeah. Okay. I thought you'd ask a harder one. Okay. Yeah. Okay. Yes.
So I have two unrelated questions.
Oh. Okay. Okay. One at a time.
So then, going on what he asked, right? So do you have a more Eremitic monasticism in the Eastern Catholic rites?
Yes. Yeah. There would be kind of still in Europe. They have the Studites, which would be more contemplative for the men, and then also there's several women's communities that are very contemplative. Kind of that monastic tradition was a very strong part of the Eastern Catholic churches, because they did not have a strong seminary system that they have, but the monasteries where people would go to study and to learn, and the people too would come to see the monks or brothers to kind of get an idea of it. Part two is...
Oh yeah, the other question is, so I don't assume you guys ever practiced the Latin Mass, but did you ever have any, but if you didn't, did you ever have any equivalent?
Yeah, we have, it's a process that's called, you can get bi-ritual faculties, and for many years I had them. When I was out in Arizona, I worked for both the Byzantine and the Roman Catholic Church, and it's not an easy thing to do. You have to be a little bit schizophrenic. I've given faculties to, God knows, maybe 100 guys, and I think only about 5% are able to do it. And it's sort of like, I'm terrible with languages, and I studied Spanish for 7 years, and no hablo nunca. But it's the same way for bi-ritual faculties and working in both traditions. There's just some people are able to do it, and you just you throw a switch in your head, and you would go and show up and do like a Roman liturgy, and then you go back to my parish and celebrate the Byzantine, and go over to the Ukrainian parish, and I'm like one Sunday. But they're all on different calendars, and you just have to, well, no, I'm Roman Catholic. You don't tell them, well, this is what we do in our church, but you have to be able to minister to both of those in a way that's authentic. And it's just, I had both, and growing up, I went to the church on the weekend and went to a Roman Catholic school during the week, so you just have to have that skill. And it's just like being able to, how many of you are multilingual? If you can speak two languages, I'm just terrible with that, but for some guys, they are able to do it, and in my life, I was able to kind of jump from one church to the other and be able to celebrate. So it's a possible thing to do, but not common, that you would be able to do it.
So then, the Eastern Catholic churches, do they use the Julian calendar for their liturgy?
No, we're on the new calendar.
Okay.
Yeah. Some of the Eastern churches still follow the Julian calendar. And even in our church, we still have parishes that still are on the Julian calendar, despite trying to urge them to switch over. Especially in the Ukrainian Catholic Church, they have one church is on the, I think in Chicago, one's on the Julian calendar, one's on the Gregorian. So I don't know. It seems like in Ukraine now they're switching to the new calendar, and that other parts of the world they're going back to the Julian. So it's just one of those things that you kind of try to be authentic to your tradition, but it makes life really complicated if you're a bishop of like for the Ukrainian Catholic, where they have both, Julian and Gregorian calendar, celebrations. Kind of nice one, because you can celebrate Christmas twice, and sometimes Easter twice, when it doesn't fall on the same day. Yeah. Okay. Okay. Yeah. Right here.
Could you talk about the history or the origin of the liturgy and the Byzantine rite, and where it originated from?
Mostly from Constantinople. And if you go to like St. Mary's or over in East Conema, on the book it says it's the divine liturgy according to St. John Chrysostom, and also this time of year we have St. Basil the Great. So our traditions all pretty much for the Byzantine Catholic Church go back to Greece, and especially Constantinople and Antiochian church is where our traditions come from, whereas yours are more located in Rome. And they both developed about the same time, about the 300s was kind of the development of where they consolidated what was kind of haphazard and standardized it across the things. As the younger Emperor Constantine, made it possible to be Christian without any problems, then that was where those traditions came from. But our traditions, for the liturgy goes back to St. John Chrysostom and St. Basil the Great. And we have some other liturgies, the pre-sanctified, which they're celebrating over at St. Mary's. Why they're not here tonight is one of the other liturgies that we have within the tradition. Then also the liturgy of the hours. It's all based on. It goes back to the Jewish traditions, as both the Roman and the Byzantine and the other churches. They are all kind of a hodgepodge of things of how they consolidated into morning and evening prayer, and all the other hours of the services are all kind of go back to either to Rome, to Greece, to Alexandria, or to Antioch, and that's where our traditions kind of coalesced into what we are today. Okay, yes?
Is there a reason why you don't call it Istanbul? It's like you call it Constantinople.
Well, it'll come back. Istanbul didn't exist until I think the
1453.
1453, right? Yeah, but it's still when it formed in the first centuries, it was Constantinople.
Yeah,
yeah.
I know, unfortunately, but there's like the myth of the Henry the Great being underneath the Golden Gate. He's going to rise up one day and take back Constantinople.
Yeah, it could happen, but not right away. I think there's only about 3,000 Christians in Istanbul today, but they're still there, and it kind of things rise and fall over time. But the Muslims are pretty dedicated. They have a tradition, obviously finding out in this war is just kind of an issue for the future, is to deal with something that's been going around since the 700s when Muhammad started to spread across the world. And it will be, also another controversy, for both Christians and those that believe in Islam. Okay, we're over here.
So, as a Ukrainian Catholic, I know we can do it twice throughout the year, but in the Ruthenian Church, is the Liturgy of St. James celebrated at all?
Not so much. We have it, but it's. I think what do they call the service? Is it?
I think just the Divine Liturgy of
St. James. Yeah, I've read it, and we don't normally do it. It was like one of the options that they had. And I think before, the 300s, when the Roman liturgy and the Byzantine liturgy came together, there are a lot of different things going on, and they just kind of consolidated around those different things. If you're in India, under the guidance of the Apostle Thomas, they had other traditions that they developed, and it's always amazing for me to go and celebrate with the other churches that. And the way I always describe it, it's like you take all the prayers from the Gospels and the Epistles and the Psalms, throw it into a blender. And if you all the parts are there, but they just kind of come out differently, and that's the way the traditions are, for the Ukrainian church too, also, we use the same books for many, many years, and now they're kind of separating off into different language groups and developing different traditions around the world. Yeah, okay. Okay, on that side, way in the back. Okay.
So, what does, a few questions kind of, but what does your daily life with your Franciscan spirituality look like? Could you give us a glimpse into that? And on the eastern side of following Franciscan spirituality, is there any sort of, on the Latin side of things, there's like orders and stuff, books that people read and follow and whatnot. Is there anything of that regard in an Eastern Franciscan spirituality?
Yeah. Well, all Franciscans would go to St. Francis, and there's like the life of St. Bonaventure. That would be kind of a guiding thing. And there's Thomas Celano is kind of not, is one of the alternative, kind of traditions that they use. But they normally, they follow the same patterns. When you're in community, you pray together, have morning and evening prayer and divine liturgy, and then sometimes they're able to celebrate the hours. And it just, the difference would be is that they just try to do it in a simple way, to be able to do something that is, gives them time to work and support themselves, which was a kind of a mandate of Francis that, he said, if people don't know what to do, teach them to work. Which is sometimes a problem, you don't have that. But was that your question, or you have a different one?
That's one of them. Would you say that you follow a rule, or not so much a strict rule of St. Francis?
Yeah, it's the same rule that they have, and each one has, from that rule, they generate their customs. As you would in Cameroon, you have your own constitutions and different types of things that you do, in terms of what's normal and how you deal with personal property and what you're allowed to do and what you're not allowed to do in terms of work is a real thing. But then also, what times to pray as a group together, and how you ordain people and send them for studies is all defined with that.
Okay. The first question I asked is, and this is just depending on what you feel like sharing with us, I suppose. But could you give us a glimpse? What does your Eastern Franciscan spirituality look like in your day-to-day life?
Okay, because I'm out of community at this point in time, it's a little bit different, but I think about it about once a day, because it's like being kind of simple brother digging ditches at the monastery was, it was not a bad deal. And now that you're, dealing with all kinds of complex interchurch things and things like that, it tends to be, as we said, just a series of interruptions as an archbishop in this church today. But what you do carry with you is just kind of that spirit of St. Francis, which is always to do things and to do it in a simple way and to do it in a way that opens you up to the Spirit of God in your life. So that's kind of where the Franciscan part of my life has been. And I always try to keep things simple, and always, as St. Francis always used to say, Jesus Christ kept his words short. You should do the same. Which is always one of the things that I've been known for, is kind of clear, short, and concise homilies when I speak. And I'm always impressed with St. Francis, and that always becomes a part of your life no matter what you do. Okay.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Okay.
I'll
Now he's
give you a
going to get the hard question.
I'll give you the hard question. So whenever you see an Eastern Orthodox priest, they always have this big bushy beard. Now, I couldn't help but notice that you and the priest that came with you are both clean shaven.
Yeah.
Are there any traditions in your Eastern churches about priests and big bushy beards?
Well, they have them. Yeah, I'm amazed too. I call them the Abraham Lincoln Brigade. But in my own life, I did have it. I started off when I was in the monastery, I had the beard and everything. And I got into the parish, and the women came up to me and they said, "Oh, I collected $350 if you cut your beard off." I took it as a gift. But it just depends. I mean, beards are in today, but like in the 1960s, one aunt said the same thing, and her two sons came back from the University of Minnesota with bushy beards. So, yeah, I've seen this before. He'll cut it off when he tries to get a job. And it's true. It's just, but it's just, I think at this point in time, it's just kind of a fashion. You have one, and Danny's got a little beard, but the big ones are, you just kind of think it's like when they see some celebration, they go, Well, ZZ Top became bishops. It's kind of the same thing, but it's all up to what you want to do. I had it for a while. It just I thought it looked great, but it's just not something that today in society is still considered it's more normal today than it was 30 years ago when I decided to take the beard off and kind of look a little bit more like a TV personality or something like that. That's always when you see them. There's a few with beards, but most are not. Yep. Okay. Yep. You're just scratching.
Caleb over there.
Wait over here. Okay.
So, being an archbishop, I assume that you have the power to ordain a new bishop. So you said you're looking for a new bishop. What would that look like whenever you have the candidate? What's the process for that?
Yeah, it's the same process as the Roman Church. We have what we do is we search out people with the ability to be a bishop, and unfortunately, you can't be married. So that's the one limiting fact that, especially for Johnstown, 90% of their guys are married. There's just a few people that they can bring in to be a bishop. So that's the one criteria that it's not real flexible at this point. The other thing you look for is just intellectual ability, being able to think clearly, and also to have a sense of prayer in their life, and the ability to be a pastoral person. So when we find somebody like that, we raise them up, and you have to come up with 3 candidates that you present. They call it a turna for 3 names. And in that process, it's sent to the nuncio, and they do their own investigations. They're very thorough. And then when those names are, if they're approved, they go to the Pope. Today would be Pope Leo, and he decides which one that he would like to pick. There's different offices in Rome that kind of filter through the names and go through that. But it's we've had to go through that process about maybe 20 times already, searching for new people. And the hard thing is it's not an easy job. And once upon a time, you live in a big house and have a big car, have a driver, and all things like that. But it's just day-to-day things of being a bishop are more challenging, and society takes you to a higher degree of responsibility, and if they don't, then you have to go. So they look for those main things that you would see, just the pastoral ability, and then also intellectual, and the spiritual person that is in touch with God. Okay. Okay. Yes.
Celebrated both the Ruthenian and the Roman liturgy and the Mass. Can you go through some of the differences, like the risen Eucharist and the doors? What is that?
I
I'm
stuff.
thinking Byzantine. Never mind.
Yeah. Okay.
I'm so sorry.
Yeah. Well, the differences would be, the similarities would be is you have the same concept of communion, but the shape of it is a little bit different because you have the host, which is unleavened bread. We have leavened bread for that, and then also the bread is placed into the chalice, and whereas you keep them separate, and then it's just the way that you deliver it is usually on a spoon, because it's just easier to give communion that way. You could do kind of the dipper thing with it's like a French fry size and put it in, but the Melkites do that, but it's not going to work over a period of time. They started it for different reasons. But is that or is there something other that you wanted to?
No, that's okay.
Yeah. Just the liturgy is a little bit different, but as I said, it's just you kind of throw it into a blender. You've got a gospel, you've got an epistle, you've got some Old Testament readings, you've got a lot of Psalms, which is going back not even to the Christian times, but back to the Judaic tradition, which goes back 3,000 years, and that's where we draw a lot of our things, even like for today's readings for the Annunciation. We're just reading on Wikipedia as we're coming in. It's actually like a tradition that came out of the Jewish hymnal and kind of all the canticles, that are about 8 of them in the Gospels, that they all we all go back to kind of the Jewish roots, and even older, ancient, more Israelite traditions that we've kind of lost track of. Okay, good. Oh, there we go.
So, as obviously a metropolitan archbishop,
speaking to a group of 40 or 50 so young adults, many of whom are looking to probably get married or pursue vocations in an increasingly secularized and hostile world to Christians. What words of advice or wisdom would you give to us as we're, moving forward into our, middle-aged and later adulthood?
Yeah, that's the challenge that the church is facing, is it has to present a way that you somehow contact Jesus Christ, our Lord and God and Savior. And it's different for everybody. Some people, the liturgy is the way that they experience, God. And other people, it's their personal prayer life, and it's just to integrate those two things together to make it work. In terms of society, I went to Columbia University, and it was like vocation testing service. That it was really a difficult thing if you're going to, like a state university, or even, some of the Catholic universities, that it's a challenge because they have to be so open to all the different views of reality that's not, Catholic or kind of scripturally oriented. And you just have to kind of look and, go to your parish priest or to, some of the religious in your life, or just to a holy person, and just to kind of guide through that and, kind of ferret through things that are part of the tradition and things that are not. But I think the ultimate reality is that if you don't feel like you're experiencing God, you're going to leave. And that's what we always try to do through our services and through all the courses and training that we do, is to give an experience of God through our particular lens of being Byzantine Catholic. And the same for the Roman, or the Ukrainian Catholic over on the far right side here. Very good. Okay. Yeah. Okay, way in the back again.
So you originally were a friar in a community, and then from there you were ordained a deacon and a priest, and became a bishop, and now you're your eminence. And so all that journey, did you go into the beginning thinking you wanted to be this or that, or did you just go in and just want to be a friar and then you want to see where it went from there?
Exactly. Yeah, I was just happy to be in the monastery, and it was kind of going. We kind of our apostolic work was filling in at other parishes. That's probably the most enjoyable part of my life, because you can go and help out at St. Mary's or some other church in the United States, and they come up to you and go, "Oh, the roof's leaking and it's all terrible." Well, you should talk to your pastor. Which was great, but with each level, that it kind of you get more responsibility as a pastor of a parish or bishop or archbishop. And to be honest, it'd be easier just to be like a brother, or to be a priest in a parish, I think. But it's just God calls you to have the gifts and talents to do what you're doing, and you try to do it as best you can. And I can remember when the call came from Rome, I just went, "Oh dear God." I'm happy where I am, but then it was on to being a bishop. And within the Eastern churches, we're so small, that you do know what the bishops go through, and they tell you the same thing. We had Bishop Dudek for many years, and he was going, "Yeah, it's better off being a priest." In his own kind of a way of saying it, from being from St. Clair, Pennsylvania. But does that answer that, or yes? Yeah.
Yep.
Okay, good. Okay.
All right.
We're tired out, so we'll go home.
Thank you, Archbishop.
Thank you very much. We're going to try to do this in Pittsburgh, so we'll maybe get a place to go and visit, and we have our services over at Penn State. So, and that's Deacon Denny is also here. They're over at the Newman Center there, and hopefully we'll get to see you again.
Lord have mercy, Lord have mercy, Lord have mercy. Most Reverend Metropolitan Archbishop, give him the blessing.
In the name of the Father, and of the Son, and of the Holy Spirit.
Amen.
Oh Lord, we ask your blessing upon this group of people coming together to hear about their their faith and to share their faith with one another. We pray that in a very real way that they become deeper and more fervent members of their churches, and we pray that Jesus will help them and guide them into a deeper relationship with them. In the name of the Father, Son, and the Holy Spirit.
Amen.
All right. Very good.
All right, thank you.
Okay, there's your back.
All right, very good. Thank you again for making the trip in from Pittsburgh. Thank you everybody for coming. Looking forward into next month. We're planning another Catholic Trivia Night, so stay tuned for that. The tentative date for that is April 10th.
I got word back. It has been confirmed.
It has been confirmed. So April 10th, Catholic Trivia Night at the Catholic War Vets. So make sure you come to that. It was a lot of fun last time. We competed with some people that were out of our age range. And if anybody's looking for a challenge, we had a group come that was largely non-Catholic that basically wiped the floor with all of us Catholics on our Catholic faith. So that's a challenge for all of us. And then moving forward to Theology on Tap next month. Next month's Theology on Tap is going to be 1 week early. It's going to be April 22nd. We're going to have Brother Francisco Whittaker, who is Whittaker. Yeah, sorry, I can't speak English. But, so he's going to come and speak on Divine Mercy. He's a Benedictine brother and seminarian from down at St. Vincent's. So again, that's April 22nd for Theology on Tap, 1 week early on Divine Mercy, which will be a great topic right after Easter. And then moving forward later in the year, we're also going to have our bishop, or our Latin bishop, Mark Barchak, come in August. We also got confirmation today that, as many of us know, Pope Leo is an Augustinian priest. We're going to have 2 Augustinian priests be coming in from Philadelphia area. We're also going to have some Sacred Heart sisters and some other great speakers ahead. So thank you guys all for coming, and we'll see you on April 10th for Catholic Trivia Night and April 22nd for Theology on Tap. So thank you guys, and thank you, Archbishop.